When it comes to the horror genre, innovation is often the name of the game. We crave the unexpected, something that can genuinely unsettle us, while also grounding us in relatable characters and emotions. Enter The Deliverance, a film that initially seems to promise something different, a fresh take on the demonic possession narrative, but ultimately succumbs to the very tropes it tries to transcend. The Deliverance begins with a gritty, grounded approach, centering on Ebony Jackson, a deeply flawed yet fiercely protective single mother played by Andra Day. Set in 2011 in Pennsylvania, Ebony's life is a daily battle against poverty, alcoholism, and her own volatile emotions. Struggling to care for her 3 children, Nate, Shantae, and Andre, while also looking after her cancer-stricken mother Alberta, Glenn Close, Ebony is portrayed as a woman barely holding it together. This first act of the film is compelling, establishing a palpable tension that keeps you on the edge of your seat. The way the film intertwines the family's socio-economic struggles with their emotional and psychological turmoil is one of its strong points. You feel the weight of their lives, the desperation that comes with poverty, and the love that, despite everything, binds them together. It's a strong, character-driven setup that promises to take the horror genre in a fresh direction, focusing on the human drama at the heart of a haunting. However, as the film transitions from setting up its characters and their world to diving into the horror elements, something shifts, and not for the better. The film that started with such promise quickly descends into a collection of familiar horror clichés. The originality that seemed to define the first act gives way to standard exorcism fare, complete with the classic effects we've seen countless times before. It's disappointing because the film had the potential to explore its themes, poverty, race, trauma, within the framework of a horror narrative in a way that felt fresh and relevant. Instead, it falls back on the well-worn tropes of the genre. The tension that was so meticulously built in the first half dissipates as the film becomes predictable, losing the psychological edge that initially set it apart. When The Deliverance fully embraces its horror elements, it does so with a lack of subtlety that undermines its effectiveness. Scenes that should be shocking are telegraphed well in advance, draining them of their impact. There's a particularly infamous scene involving Andre, the youngest son, in a classroom that feels more cringeworthy than horrifying, and it's emblematic of the film's larger issues. Director Lee Daniels, best known for his dramatic work, seems out of his element when handling the horror aspects of the story. The scares are often heavy-handed, and the film leans too much on special effects when a more restrained approach could have been far more effective. Horror often works best when it's what we don't see, what's left to the imagination, that terrifies us. Unfortunately, The Deliverance doesn't seem to trust its audience enough to take this route. Despite the film's shortcomings, there's no denying that the cast delivers strong performances. Andra Day, who was nominated for an Academy Award for her role as Billie Holiday in The United States vs. Billie Holiday, once again proves her acting chops. As Ebony, she creates a compelling, flawed character who is both frustrating and sympathetic. Day's portrayal of a mother on the brink is nuanced and powerful, and she brings a depth to the role that the script sometimes fails to match. Glenn Close, as Alberta, delivers a typically strong performance, bringing a sense of gravitas to the film. Her dynamic with Day is one of the film's highlights, and you can feel the tension and history between these two women. The children, played by Anthony B. Jenkins, Caleb McLaughlin, and Demi Singleton, also do well with their roles, though they're given less to work with as the film progresses. The problem isn't the cast, it's the material they're given. The script doesn't delve deep enough into these characters, leaving them as archetypes rather than fully realized people. There's enough there to make you care about them, but not enough to truly understand them, which makes the emotional beats of the film less impactful than they could have been. One of the most frustrating aspects of The Deliverance is how it wastes the potential of its themes. The film touches on issues of poverty, race, and trauma, but it doesn't explore them in a meaningful way. These themes are present, but they're not fully integrated into the story. Instead, they feel like window dressing for a standard horror narrative, rather than being the driving force behind the horror. The film also seems to be trying to comment on the current state of horror, particularly the rise of the black horror, and the influence of filmmakers like Jordan Peele. However, where Peele's films use horror as a lens to examine societal issues, The Deliverance feels more like an attempt to cash in on a trend without fully understanding what makes that kind of horror work. By the time the film reaches its climax, it has become clear that The Deliverance isn't going to break any new ground. The final act is a rehash of scenes and ideas we've seen before in countless other possession films. There's nothing here that surprises or challenges the audience, and the emotional impact is blunted by the predictability of it all. The climax tries to ramp up the tension and horror, but it's too little, too late. The film's reliance on special effects over character-driven storytelling is its downfall, and what should be a powerful, terrifying finale instead feels like a checklist of horror tropes. The Deliverance had the potential to be something special. It starts with a strong premise, a talented cast, and the promise of a horror film that's about more than just scares. But it's a film that can't seem to decide what it wants to be. Is it a psychological drama? A supernatural thriller? A commentary on race and poverty? In trying to be all of these things, it ends up being none of them. For those looking for a new take on the horror genre, The Deliverance is likely to disappoint. It's a film that starts strong but loses its way, ultimately delivering a familiar and forgettable experience. The performances are worth noting, particularly Andra Day's, but they're not enough to save the film from its own shortcomings. In the end, The Deliverance is a reminder that sometimes less is more, and that the most effective horror comes from a deep understanding of both the genre and the human condition. Unfortunately, this film falls short on both counts, leaving audiences with little more than a standard Sunday movie that could have been so much more.